We're turning to the book of Exodus today, and Exodus, of course, is the story of God saving his people. God promised that he would make a nation. He makes this promise to Abraham. God says that he will build a community, build a people group. If you were here on Ash Wednesday with us, we talked about this. But these people of God, Abraham's people, God's people, are now oppressed, and they are being enslaved by the Egyptians. And God leads them out of that oppression. He leads them toward the promised land. That's why the choir's anthem was so perfect this morning. We need God to do these things in our lives, and we see God's activity through the lives of his people as he brings them to the promised land. That's this amazing story that doesn't end, but it begins to unfold in the book of Exodus. Now, Christians and New Testament writers have always seen that story, that story of God saving his people in Exodus as the very same story of our rescue from sin through Jesus Christ. And so this Lent, as we work toward Easter, lead up toward Easter, we're going to be looking at moments in the book of Exodus when we see God delivering his people. And when we do that, we are going to be affirming that God is not just a deliverer, but God is the deliverer. God delivers his people, saves his people, not just because that's something he does, not just because he's a really nice guy, but because this is who he is. God is the deliverer. That's his very nature. So the story of Exodus is the story of God being the deliverer, and the story of Jesus is the same story. That's going to be important for us this morning, but I think you'll agree with me that it is really God's timing too. When we think of the Florida shooting this week, this shooting that follows so many others, including right here in our own community, with some of you bearing the direct grief and loss of that. And even more than that, when we think of the anxiety and concerns in our culture, we have these questions about violence that are social and systemic and personal and even spiritual. We have this level of anxiety in our whole culture that is just unprecedented. Even though we live in this modern age with all of these safeguards, we are inundated by fear and uncertainty. Economic concerns, health concerns, loneliness, a lack of community that is just epidemic as well, a lack of support for people. Things like that connect us to Exodus. The Hebrews in Exodus have fears like this too. But in their case, they are slowly and literally being wiped out by an evil king. So let's check out Exodus a bit. On Wednesday, on Ash Wednesday, we began this, and we looked at the very beginning of Exodus. And we find that the Hebrews, these people of Abraham, are being oppressed by this ruthless king of Egypt. He has this gruesome plan to commit genocide. He wants the Hebrews utterly wiped out. And so he commands all his people, if you can imagine this, all of the Egyptians, he commands to kill every male baby. They're supposed to throw these babies into the Nile. It's horrific. And so what happens next is in our text this morning. We have a mother, her name is Jochebed, and she has had a baby. And it's a boy, a healthy boy. Imagine her fear and her anxiety. She is in this absolutely impossible situation. She loves her new baby boy, and every baby boy is being thrown into the Nile. How can she possibly trust God in a situation like that? That's the same question we might ask about our fears. How can we trust God? So let's turn to the book of Exodus and read from chapter 2, just the first 10 verses. Hear the word of God. Now, a man from the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was a fine baby, she hid him 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and plastered it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds on the bank of the river. Her sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river while her attendants walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her maid to bring it. When she opened it, she saw the child. He was crying, and she took pity on him. "This must be one of the Hebrews' children," she said. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Yes." So the daughter went and called the child's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and she took him as her son. She named him Moses, because, she said, "I drew him out of the water." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I think that one of the most difficult things for parents to do is this gradual letting go of their children that we all have to do. Letting go of protection, letting kids sort of make their way in the world. We are, Kathy and I, down to the wire here with Bethany. She's a senior going to college. We're absolutely not ready for that. She's ready, but we're not as ready. I know many of you have gone through that. Some of you are going through that with us right now, just like we are. But I read a news article this week about a woman named Tricinda Fox. And for her, this letting go that she had to do with her child came way too early in this baby's life, and it was way too literal. In December of 2005, Fox's apartment building in the Bronx caught fire, and flames were quickly engulfing her third-floor bedroom. And as that happened, she was forced to contemplate the unthinkable. Outside, 30 feet below her bedroom window, people had gathered, and they watched with growing concern as smoke billowed around this mother and her 1-month-old baby. With no fresh air in the apartment, she began leaning out the window with her baby. Finally, with all other options exhausted, Tricinda let go. The infant tumbled 3 stories into the waiting arms of a guy named Felix Vasquez, a housing authority employee and a catcher on the local baseball team. Vasquez was a lifeguard too, and so he caught the baby, he performed CPR, and he saved its life. Later, this Tricinda was rescued from her apartment by firefighters, and she was reunited with her baby, and both of them were fine. The baby, though, would not have survived long enough to wait for that rescue. If Tricinda had not let go, the outcome would have been very different. She was asked about this later in this news article, and she said, "I prayed that someone would catch him and save his life. I said, 'Please, God, save my son.'" What would it take to have that kind of trust, to trust God like that? In our Exodus narrative this morning, we meet this mother, Jochebed, who, as I said, is in this impossible situation. Her baby is in danger, just as much danger as Tricinda's baby was. In fact, we could easily picture Jochebed leaning out the window just like Tricinda did, having to make this completely unbearable choice to let go. Jochebed is thrilled with her baby. Later, his name will be Moses, but we don't know that yet in the beginning of the story. Jochebed has this baby in the text, and the text says that Jochebed sees that he was a fine baby. Now, that doesn't mean that Jochebed was waiting to kind of see how he would turn out or anything like that. It's just this affirmation that Moses was healthy and that Jochebed loved her baby. In fact, in the Hebrew language, we learn that when she hid the baby, she hid him in the sense of treasuring him and protecting something of great value. Everyone, everywhere, has been ordered to throw this baby and every baby boy into the Nile. What is Jochebed going to do? How is she going to trust God in a situation like that is just full of fear and anxiety? She knows this baby is going to end up in the Nile, but she wants to give him a fighting chance. Rather than risking that someone, and it could be anyone, would come along and take the baby from her and throw the baby into the river, she decides to put Moses in the river herself. She's running out of hiding places. She's been doing this for 3 months. She needs a new hiding place. So she lovingly creates this papyrus basket. She coats it with materials that will protect it and make it float. This is waterproofing she's doing. And she hides her son in the one place Egyptians would never bother to look, the very river that they're using to execute children. Later, Exodus affirms that Jochebed obeyed the king's command when she which was, to put babies in the river. But of course, she did it by building an ark for the baby. The basket in Hebrew, one of the words used for the basket is the same word as the ark that Noah built. And so, Jochebed lets go. She has to trust God, but she is not uninvolved. She's not just setting Moses adrift and just seeing what will happen. That woman in the Bronx, in the burning building, when she let her baby go, she at least knew that someone might catch him. She saw the people down there and hoped for the best. Jochebed is not just setting the baby adrift. She's hiding the baby in the river. She has to have great trust in God to do what she does, but she's also not just giving up. Imagine the trust that she has to have to hide this baby in the reeds, to keep it hidden. Her other children keeping an eye on the baby, trying to keep the baby safe, but there is no safety guaranteed here. The uncertainty is extreme. It can be hard, right, for us to trust God sometimes. It shouldn't be hard, but it is. Parents and teachers and students watch on TV what happened in Florida this week. And people right here experienced it firsthand at Freeman High in September. So important to us. Parents see that or experience that and then send their kids to school every day trying to trust God. Or we watch a loved one suffer with an illness and we try to trust God. We worry over finances and job security. A friend of mine got a text from her son a few weeks ago. He was in Hawaii. Incoming missile. There is so much fear. How can we trust God in that? Jochebed does, but she's still being smart. She's doing whatever she can to protect her baby. She's involved. Trusting God means letting go, giving God our cares, just like Joe said in the children's sermon. It absolutely means that, but it also means still caring, still making a difference. That's the kind of trust that Jochebed has, trusting God, but active. Of course, the story in Exodus continues. The baby's being hidden, being protected, but everything is so dangerous. The anxiety and the fear in the text is so obvious. And while this story is progressing, we haven't heard anything about God yet. Did you notice that in the text when we read it? This is actually the way this text is written. We saw that on Ash Wednesday too in the text just before this. It's the same kind of pattern that the author uses. God isn't really mentioned. This is just this story that is unfolding, and the author of Exodus leaves it to the reader to know why, to know what's really going on. The most important aspect of this story isn't even stated in the text. It's just implied by this unfolding narrative here. How do we trust God according to this text? The answer is implied. So the baby is hidden, and then we have this sequence of events that occurs, and it's in these events that we learn about real trust. This is not a plan. Jochebed doesn't make it happen. The baby's sister does not orchestrate anything. In the story, this is just what happens, and it's left to the reader to know why. And the reader does know why as this sequence of events occurs. And so in the story, the daughter of the very king who has ordered that all the babies be killed, that person finds the baby. Terrifying. For Jochebed, this would be one of the last people you would ever want to find your baby. But in this amazing, ironic moment, she takes pity on the baby. The king's daughter wants to save the baby. This is a complete surprise. So the baby's sister, we were sure this is Miriam, sees what's happening, and she takes advantage of the situation. She takes advantage of what's going on. Miriam is so amazing. She offers to go find a wet nurse, and of course, it turns out to be Jochebed. The king's daughter gives Moses back to his mother. She's going to nurse him, and she even pays her a wage. It's one of the most ironic moments in all of Scripture. And never once in that sequence of events is God even mentioned. And that's because the reader already knows that God is at work. The reader knows that this is what it means to trust God. That God is at work in all of this. None of this happens because Jochebed or Miriam make it happen, but also none of it is just coincidental. It all unfolds just as God would have it unfold. The author never says this is what God does. Instead, it is just this implicit outgrowth of who God is. Delivering people out of oppression or worry or fear is not something that God does every now and then. God is the deliverer. This is who he is. And so these events unfold not just because God is directing them, though he certainly is. They unfold because it is his very nature. This is just what happens with someone like God around. We don't just trust what God does. Instead, we trust in God himself. And that is so different. Because it's God's very character to save us and to redeem us. God is just the one who delivers his people. And that's when we begin to understand what trusting God really means. It doesn't mean just giving up, just putting our cares in a basket and letting them go, and after that just being oblivious. It doesn't mean just hoping for the best. It means letting God be who he is in your life and letting that be enough. After all, not everything works out in the story, right? Things are not okay. Moses lives, but so many other babies die. Jochebed has to share her baby with the daughter of the very person who ordered all the babies killed. And right after our text, you probably know Moses grows up to commit murder. Everything is not okay. The point of this text is not, just trust God and everything will be fine. The trust that we can have in God is so much more than that. Throughout this story, we see where trust comes from. Jochebed isn't just trusting that God is going to do something. She's relying on the very character of God. God is the deliverer. He works through history and in your life in big ways with kings and little ways with babies. He works in ways that maybe aren't explicit to bring about his plan, to bring about his will. He even works as we work, making arks for our children, sending our family to watch over our cares in the river. We can connect our fears to the fears in the text. Will God deliver trust to us? Can we trust him? The oppression of the Hebrews, the killing of babies, our fears for a loved one, our worries over what might happen. Certainly, we can trust what God does. We can believe that things will be good. We can cast our cares on him and we can live free. But this text shows us that we can trust God way beyond that, too. We can actually trust in the very person of God. And so the baby is named Moses by the king's daughter. It's an Egyptian name, but by the sound of it in Hebrew, it sounds like a name that means out of. The story doesn't give us all the answers. We don't understand why so much evil and suffering has occurred. We don't understand why Moses is saved and all these other babies aren't. But we understand now that God will bring his people Moses, bring his people out of all of this horror. In fact, he's using a baby to do it, the very exact target of this evil, to save his people, to set things right. This is who God is. And this Lent, we are affirming also that this is who God is in Jesus Christ. He sent a baby. He sent a deliverer because that is who God is. We can't always trust in circumstances, but we can always trust in the very person of God. He brings us out of our fears through Jesus Christ, not just to save the Hebrews, but to save the whole world and set things right. Amen.